Good afternoon. Well, good afternoon, definitely for Omer. Good evening to those in Italy, and good lunchtime to me. Uh, thanks for coming back, Omer.
Thanks for having me.
Italiano un momento. Allora, terza o quarta, tra l'altro non ho tenuto il conto, conversazione con Omer Bartov che ci raggiunge a Providence, Rhode Island, Brown University. Avete il link alla sua pagina di Wikipedia nella descrizione. Andremo in inglese, una conversazione iniziata 7-8 mesi fa, se non ricordo, a seguito ovviamente di quanto accade tra Gaza, Israele, Palestina e ora Libano e West Bank. Niente, io farò delle domande, poi sentiamo cosa mi dice Omer. Fra 3 minuti va solo per gli abbonati, perché i contenuti buoni li lasciamo lì, anche perché così evitiamo polemiche un po' sciocche e non aggressioni inutili che proprio non gradiscono, La Providence di Lovecraft. Let's ask Omer, is that the Providence of Lovecraft? The one where you are? If you are in Providence, I'm assuming you're at...
I'm not. I'm actually in Cambridge, Massachusetts.
Oh, in Cambridge.
Yeah.
All right. Well, it's even up farther north, more. All right. Then no Providence, Cambridge, Massachusetts.
Yeah.
All right. Back to the thing. So let's start from the event that has made people discuss, and on which you actually are a specialist, the ICC thing. Your reading, your interpretation, the way it should be looked at, and well, we'll see about consequences, if any.
Well, so, the prosecutor back in May brought his documents to the ICC, to the justices at the ICC, to issue arrest warrants for 3 Hamas leaders and 2 Israeli leaders. Israeli leaders, Benjamin Netanyahu and Yoav Gallant, at the time Prime Minister and Minister of Defense. And the 3 Hamas leaders, 2 of whom, Hania and Sinwar, have been killed, and Deaf, the third one, is almost certainly killed, but Hamas has not formally announced his death. And so that was back in May. And just now, the ICC finally issued the arrest warrants requested by the prosecutor against Netanyahu. Gallant, who is no longer Minister of Defense, he was fired by Netanyahu, and Mohammed Deif, who is likely dead. They basically followed the same logic of the prosecutor's brief, which had to do with war crimes and crimes against humanity. And those focus on, first of all, deprivation of food. That is using hunger as an instrument, as a military instrument, and which is obviously a war crime. They added to that also that part of what the population was not getting as a result of IDF actions was medical supplies. And because of the lack of medical supplies, many people died, but also people who needed to have a medical treatment, such as, and there were many amputations, there was no access to anesthetics, even in the few hospitals that were still operating. So children and adults had limbs amputated without anesthetics. And that was seen, obviously, also as a crime of its own account. That is, not only deprivation of food, but also crime against humanity in the sense of causing severe pain to the people targeted by the IDF. Now, what they rejected was the accusation of extermination. They said that there was not enough evidence for extermination, but there was evidence of murder. That is that Palestinians in Gaza were being killed not only as a kind of on the side as a result of military operations.
As it is called, it's become since the first Iraq war, the collateral damage.
Right, not only as collateral
that expression, may I say, disgusting, but anyhow. I mean, we can say we just murder people and we didn't mean it. It doesn't have to be called collateral damage.
It is, but a lot of countries would not accept that because countries that engage in war, it is often the case that if you even if you're fighting a just war and fighting it as justly as you can, then civilians get killed.
No, I am aware. I'm not blaming. In fact, I'm not pointing finger and say, necessarily.
But in international law, there's a difference between what you call collateral damage, but which is, say, you're using indiscriminate violence, and what the ICC was saying, that there were cases of intentional killing of civilians. But they identified only 2 cases, and therefore they did not call it extermination, which would be on a larger scale, but murder, in the sense that civilians were being killed intentionally, not only indiscriminately. So these are very, very serious allegations. It's the first time, in fact, because the ICC has not been around that long, as you know, it's the first time that leaders of a country that is sees itself and is seen by many of its allies as a Western country, so to speak, and as a democracy, the leaders of such a country are accused of war crimes and crimes against humanity, and are supposed to be tried by the International Criminal Court. And that has major ramifications, although it does not carry any immediate implications for the people involved.
Yes, so let's explore a bit more this thing, also to dispel some of the polemical and fairly stupid argument that I've seen around that tries to dismiss the thing as just a anti-Semitic. So first of all, there is the accusation toward Hamas and the involvement of the 3 leaders, which I think it's only proper. What in detail, so let me put a few questions in sequence. What in details are they accused of versus the 2 Israeli Prime Minister, Minister of Defense? And what is within the set of indictment, the difference between these and those toward Putin and its associate? Because a lot of people have tried to argue incorrectly, these people are putting Putin and Netanyahu exactly on the same basis, as if every district attorney that indicts somebody, no matter what the crime is, they're all identical, 45 people in a mass shooting, shoplifting, both indicted by the is putting shoplifter on the same level of mass murderer, but that alone should, but I want to hear from you, so maybe we clarify that. And then if you have a moment, probably but this is judgmental, if there is any practical consequence, enforcement, or possibility that this will be enforced, 3 out of 5 are dead, as you pointed out. So it's a bit matter of symbols. And I think, to the extent you take, there is a symbolic aspect to justice at its procedure, it makes sense, whereas the other 2 are well alive and fairly powerful and probably, I suppose, not suitable for prison or something like that.
Well, I'll start by saying that Netanyahu is certainly suitable for prison, but I don't know that he's going to get there. So from what I recall regarding the indictment for Hamas, And as we said, 2 are dead. In fact, the third is also dead. Death is 99.9% dead. And the IDF declared him as dead, but he was still indicted because there is no official recognition by Hamas that he died. So from my recollection, obviously they were not accused of the same crimes because they did not deprive their enemies' civilian populations of food. But the indictment was quite serious, and it had to do with war crimes and crimes against humanity, in the sense that there's good evidence of killing of large numbers of civilians and of hostage taking, both of which are obviously very serious crimes. So they were charged with war crimes and crimes against humanity. In the case of Israel, in fact, there was the ICC was a bit more cautious, and it chose to indict these 2 leaders largely with deprivation of sources of living and of medical supplies. And only, as I said, one section of it has to do with killing, with direct intentional killing, targeting of civilians. And it says clearly they're charging them with murder, but not with extermination. So I think that they were more cautious with Netanyahu and Gallant because they wanted to go with what was most easily proven. And there is a vast amount of material to show that despite what Israel claims that it's allowing help in, that it is not doing so, or it's allowing in only very little. Or as the court said, it's allowing trucks, supply trucks in only under pressure, which is all true.
All right, now we know that. Let me interrupt you here,
Yeah.
because maybe you can. Why are they doing this in such an explicit way and in such a apparently uniformly accepted way in Israel? It seems to be confirming even. I've been seeing a tentative, obviously, of using this to reoccupy Gaza, kick out as many Palestinians as possible, and then do the same in the West Bank from the start, or shortly after the start, I have to say. But this has been violently denied by a lot of Israeli friends and other Jewish people around, supporters of Netanyahu and not, and opposers, political opposers. Whereas this thing of the continuous deprivation is obviously supporting evidence for that. Now it connects with the fact that it's becoming more and more explicit what the plan is. But why? So is it just what, in your face? I don't care?
No, it's not only that. No, it has to do both with a political plan that has been partly articulated here and there, but it's never been put out entirely, and with public pressure, especially from the extreme right, but not only. That is, many people in Israel, you can talk with people in Israel who will tell you, why are we giving food? Of course, it's not Israel that is actually giving food, it's just giving access, but many Israelis would say, why would we ever give food to our enemies during a time of war? What country does such a thing? What country would provide its enemy population with food?
Actually, all of them when you occupy the territory, I should add.
Of course. But what I'm saying is...
it just, in Italy, they are learning a history that has probably been published, elaborating in Disneyland. I get mad every time I hear things. That sounds Israel is following the track.
Well, look, Israelis are watching Israeli networks, which are reporting a particular version of the truth, if you could call it that. Al Jazeera is no longer allowed in Israel. And you can get news, of course, in Israel from anywhere you want. You can get an app on your phone and watch whatever you like, but most people don't do it. Most people watch their own national media in most countries. And in Israel, the media is providing a very narrow view of things, And it would be this kind of version. Why are we giving food to the enemies, to the population of the enemy at the time of war? Now, the extremists, and there were many, actually physically blocked columns of trucks heading from Jordan to the West Bank. Now, that would not be a big problem for the Israeli police to disperse those people, but the Israeli police is under Mr. Ben-Gvir, who is an extremist in the cabinet, and so the police are reluctant to get involved. And then the army should get involved, but the army doesn't really want to get involved with civilian protesters. And so there are many, many reports of trucks that have been set on fire or blocked. So partly it has to do with this sort of popular sentiment that, of course, is being fed by propaganda. As you say, if you occupy a country, then you are, as a military, you're responsible for the welfare of the people. That's why Israel is being charged with that, because that's the duty of an occupation army. So it's obviously illegal not to provide them with food. But you have to remember that from the very beginning, people like Gallant and many others said, we will not give them any food, we will not give them any water, we will not give them any power. We will just block everything. Now, at the time when he said that in early October last year, one could have said, well, this was being said at the heat of the moment. It's right after the massacre. People are very angry. But it turns out it's not just that whether at the time or subsequently, an entire plan was hatched. And that plan, and that's where the policy comes in, the plan is to actually make life unbearable, impossible in Gaza, to make Gaza uninhabitable for Palestinians. Now we know that what has been happening in northern Gaza since early October this year, early October 24, is an operation that has been spoken about on the Israeli media long before it began. It was proposed by a certain general, a reserve general, who believes that he's a strategist, which was to remove all the civilian population from the northern third of Gaza. And how do you do that? How do you get them to leave? Well, you tell them you have 24 hours or a week to leave the place. And after you don't leave, you are considered to be a military target, and you will not get any food supplies whatsoever. And that part of Gaza has received very, very few food supplies, trucks of food. And there's hardly any water, any healthy water, because the IDF has bombed all the water supply. They have desalination plants there. They've all been destroyed. Power has been destroyed, which is needed for pumps. And so there's hardly any drinkable water either. So it is part of a policy whose goal, and as I said, it's not been articulated in precisely by Israeli leaders, because it's obviously a criminal undertaking, but the goal is to make Gaza uninhabitable, to move the population further and further south, to deprive it of any sources of food, medicine, water, housing, so that either it will die out or flee. And there would be pressure, international pressure, to let those people leave, to take them into other places.
So the great plan that I heard from a colleague, unfortunately, that belongs to some of the most disgusting, I have to say, political part in Israel, in a moment of drunkenness in my home in Chicago in 1992, that struck me as shocking, is taking place. That's what you're telling me. Yeah, push them to the sea or to the Sinai. It's their choice.
Yes, and the term second intifada has been used everywhere to do, again, to, so to speak, finish the job that was not finished in 1948, because, in 1948, the State of Israel, as it was being formed, expelled about 750,000 Palestinians from what became the State of Israel, leaving it with only 150,000 Palestinians, right? Many of those Palestinians ended up in the West Bank and the Gaza Strip. 80% of the population of the Gaza Strip are Palestinian refugees from 1948 and their descendants. But in 1967, Israel reconquered or conquered these territories, the West Bank and the Gaza Strip, and got back many of the Palestinians it had expelled in 1948. And since then, there's more or less a balance, a demographic balance between Palestinians and Jews in the territory between the Jordan and the Sea, the South Lebanon and Egypt, right? But because of that, Israel has never known how it can resolve the issue with the Palestinians, if not politically, by sharing the land. What does he do with these large numbers of Palestinians? Now 7 million Palestinians and 7 million Jews. And the Hamas attack of October 7th was seen by the extreme right in Israel as an opportunity to resolve this question. And that is filtered into the military and is now being executed. Most of the Gaza Strip now is destroyed. Now, you asked also about the case of Putin, and I want to touch on that because it's sort of interesting to make that comparison. South Africa appealed to the ICJ, right, to the International Court of Justice, against Russia. And the reason that Ukraine did that was that Russia claimed that it invaded Ukraine because there was a genocide of Russians going on in Ukraine. And the Genocide Convention, hypothetically, allows you to intervene in cases of genocide in the affairs of a sovereign state. Ukraine went to the ICJ and said, we are not carrying any genocide at all. This is an illegal war of aggression. And the Russians are just pretending that they're doing it because there's some kind of genocide going on. That showed the complexity of the Genocide Convention, which allows states to do something that nothing else would allow them to do. That is to intervene in the affairs of another sovereign state, which is why many states were not happy with the Genocide Convention. Putin eventually, so when Ukraine did that, the ICJ, after deliberating this, issued provisional measures to Russia. But Russia, of course, paid no heed to that because Russia is a permanent member of the Security Council and has veto power. And so there's no way to enforce the provisional measures of the ICJ. Eventually,
the current Israel government is permanent member of the
Israel has the United States
via the U.S. government.
Yes, exactly. So
as you know better than me,
right? So if you are a country that has veto power, if you're one of the permanent members, such as China and Russia and the U.S., or if you are the proxy or an ally of a country that has that, then you can be protected from international law and you can act with impunity. So Russia is acting with impunity, but there's many sanctions on it and so forth. Putin himself was charged with a particular aspect of international law, which is related also to the Genocide Convention, which is of kidnapping children. The Genocide Convention is about the destruction of groups and not of individuals. And one way to destroy a group's identity is to take away its children, as we know happened in Canada, in the United States, in Australia, stealing of children, indigenous children, and raising them as white, so to speak. And then they don't know what their own culture is, and eventually that culture will die out. That's a genocidal action, and that's what he is charged with. That doesn't mean that he's not guilty of many other war crimes, of course, but there was good documentation of that. So I would say that in the case of Israel that we're talking about right now, the ICC chose these particular aspects of international law because they could be best documented And I think it gave, in that sense, also a green light to the ICJ to maybe move a bit faster on adjudicating allegations of genocide by South Africa and now several other countries that joined it.
Let me ask you one question also for people to understand. So the ICJ and the International Criminal Court, can you explain what the exact relations are, and which countries, beside the Security Council aspect you have introduced and the de facto impunity, there is also a acceptance or not acceptance of their ruling and jurisdiction, which I understand United States, for example.
Right. So look, I mean, the International Court of Justice, the ICJ, was formed together with the UN. It's a UN institution, and all countries that are members of the UN have to abide by what the ICJ decides. The ICJ has two roles. One is to rule in the case of disputes between countries. So when South Africa appealed to the ICJ in the case of Israel, it put that as a dispute between South Africa and Israel, with South Africa saying to Israel that Israel was conducting genocide and Israel rejecting that claim. That's one role. The second role of the ICJ is to act as an advisor to the UN on issues of international importance. So just recently, the ICJ, after several years of deliberating that, ruled on the Israeli occupation and found the occupation to be illegal and ordered it to be stopped as soon as possible. And now again, the ICJ is a court, and the only way to enforce its rulings is through the Security Council. But that finding has other implications. It has implications for all members of the UN, all countries that are members of the UN, to act accordingly. So countries that keep having, say, economic relations with Israel or with the West Bank specifically, are in breach of this finding that this is an illegal situation. The ICC was formed much more recently. The Genocide Convention of 1948 actually recommends the creation of an international criminal court, but it was not formed. And there were many countries that didn't want it to be formed, which is why it wasn't formed. It was established only following the Rome Statute of 1998. Now, the ICC is not a direct member of the UN. It's a separate body. By now, there are, I believe, 194 countries that are members of the Rome Statute and recognize the ICC, the authority of the ICC. That includes most European countries. The United States, Russia, Sudan.
It's important to understand this is the one that has issued lo dico in italiano, sorry, la ICC, International Criminal Court, che sta
correct. So, yeah,
quella che ha fatto e non è un oro nelle Nazioni Unite. Prego.
Sì, the International Criminal Court.
You speak Italian a bit.
Yeah.
So I cannot say bad things about you. Huh?
No, that no. The main difference between the ICC and the ICJ, apart from their affiliation, that the International Criminal Court is not a direct part of the UN, is that while the ICJ rules in cases of states, it's only engaged in issues of states and relations between states, or what states do. The ICC is only concerned with people. It can charge people of crimes, not states.
Not states. Which
so,
makes sense, given.
Yeah, because it's a criminal court. I mean, you can't put a state, to a court. You have to bring an individual. So the United States, Russia, Sudan, Israel, those are countries that have not recognized the authority of the ICC and have declared so. Now, they all have good reasons not to recognize the authority of the ICC. The ICC, being quite recent, has nonetheless come under a fair amount of criticism in the world for mostly acting against leaders of non-European countries in the Southern Hemisphere, and was seen as an unjust court in that sense, that it never put on the dock people from industrialized countries. And here, again, the case of Israel stands out because unlike Sudan and other countries in the Southern Hemisphere, Israel is closely connected to Western countries, has alliances, has close commercial contacts, and is seen as culturally and politically part of the industrialized world. So there are people who argue that the indictment of Israeli leaders by the ICC has to do with the ICC trying to show itself as being sort of willing also to indict people who are from the industrialized world. I would say, and in this, I'm following some other people who have spoken about this since, such as Michael Sfard, who is a civil rights lawyer in Israel, a very smart individual, that in fact the International Criminal Court took a very brave position on this, because, as we said, the International Criminal Court is fighting for its own existence. There's criticism on it, and to indict two Israeli leaders pits it directly against the United States. And the United States, for its own reasons, quite independently of Israel, never wanted to recognize the authority of the ICC. It claims that it's soldiers.
Because of the various wars, and because it is personal, and therefore exactly. The United States tend to refuse the idea that its citizens can be tried by any, especially the military involved. Right? In Italy, they all have learned with the famous story many years ago of two NATO airplanes that, because of the pilot's insanity,
yes, I remember.
Killed various dozens of people in a mountain resort. That's let's say it's an ugly imperial tradition of the United States administrations.
Yeah, I think it was actually invented by the Roman Empire.
You're correct. and it speaks volumes.
Yes, exactly. But it's an imperial view.
It's an imperial view.
Yeah.
Are above Europe, the red, which is, let me move away from this and go to a more political. This whole thing, and this particular example, and you're pointing out that it's the same logic that the Roman Empire used with respect to its own citizen and those that got its citizen, which was why the Italians eventually they gave it to the whole peninsula inhabitants. It's essentially a mocking of this whole idea of international law and international relation based on law and order that various, not only US and Western administration, keep insisting upon. Even people like me, sometimes have tried to believe it would, in some sense, make sense. When you read at this politically, this gigantic charade for which there is rule-based international relation, that applies to the other. It doesn't apply to us that propose and are supposed to enforce it. I mean, there is a coherence. One always say, well, you want to see a set of laws, you need somebody to enforce it. And it has to be super partes. So that's one solution. I'm the empire, and so I impose the laws. They're good for you, and I'm super partes because as long as you obey, I treat you equally. What's the reading of the scholar of all these things, Omer?
Look, I mean, many of these issues now have come to the fore because of what we see I would say both in the case of Russia, Ukraine, and now obviously in the case of Israel, Gaza, and Lebanon, and so forth, this kind of edifice of international law was put into place in the wake of World War II. And the idea was to have a set of rules and courts and institutions and agreements between states that would make it more difficult, hopefully impossible, for rogue states such as Nazi Germany, which is what people had in mind at the time, to act as they do, to go beyond the law. And the Genocide Convention was very much part of that, right? How do you prevent genocide? You have to identify that there's a genocide. You have to identify that there's an intention to carry out a genocide. And if you have a set of laws that says if somebody is trying to carry out genocide, you should prevent it. And if you have failed to prevent it, you should punish those who did it, right? That's what the convention is about. And the United States played a major role in all this. The UN was built in the US. The US funded the UN. The US supported that. And it appeared at the time, as we see also with the very important case of the Nuremberg Tribunal, that the great powers, as they were called, in that case, the Soviet Union, France, Britain, the US, decided that they would enforce some kind of international law. The problem, of course, with international law is that it's international. And that means that it's not, those who make it up are not equal. There are large countries and small countries, important countries and less important countries. And so when you try to think, how does that operate? Larger countries can have much more influence than smaller countries. For instance, we know that in China, the Uyghurs are being suppressed, and the concentration camps and re-education camps, and millions of people are suffering from that. But no one is going to fool around with China. It's too big. It's economically too important. And so one can mention it in passing to show that one cares, but nothing will really happen, not simply because of veto power, but also because of the sheer economic power, demographic power of such a country, which makes people say, okay, so what do we need all this international legal regime for if you can't go after countries carrying out crimes? And in part, it's true. But my own take on this is a bit different. I think that it is important to have a set of rules, and it is important to apply them, to enforce them as best one can. And one way of doing that is not that you necessarily can punish those countries, but you can shame them. You can put them, you can point at them and say, here are the rules. These countries are breaking the rules, and they should know that, and the public in general should know that. And this is why the case of Israel is so troubling, because, in 1948, two things happened. One was the Genocide Convention, very much in response to the Holocaust, and the second was the establishment of the State of Israel, which also was very much a kind of response by the international community. People said it's time for the Jews to have a state of their own, because when they didn't have a state, a third of them were murdered by the Nazis. And now Israel, to my mind, is carrying out a genocidal war. It's no longer a war because there's no real fighting there, in fact. So it's a genocidal campaign in Gaza. And it's doing that, and has been doing that for over a year, with complete impunity. And so Israel is actually quite apart from what it's doing to Palestinians, which is the main tragedy, it's also, by doing that, making a mockery of the entire international regime, legal regime. And the result of this will obviously be that many other rogue states will say, you didn't do anything to Israel, why should we pay any attention? to these rules. It's just a facade. So again, as I said about the ICC, the result will be that countries will say, these rules are only, you apply them only to those you want to, and you spare those who are your allies or yourselves, and therefore they're not worth the paper they're written on. That is a major problem with the international legal regime, and the answer to this is not to undo it. It's not to say, okay, let's just cancel the UN. It's just a chatterbox. Let's not have any rules at all, and people will do à la guerre comme à la guerre. No, what one should do is actually try to enforce those and to have people pay a price for what they do, which is what the ICC is trying to do right now. That is to make at least people like Netanyahu and Gallant pariahs, so they have to stay in their own country and never travel anywhere.
Well, I hope that happens, Omer. On this, I'm very conflicted. I mean, we have different, I don't know, we certainly seem to have, I knew of you because of your writings that I've been interested in the past. In fact, I had kind of removed from my brain the Israel-Palestinian thing until October 7. I guess it was psychological self-defense. But I had not met you personally. On this, I have very conflicting view. I think there is a moral aspect of that, and also a principle aspect and a pragmatic aspect that says, you're right, we should try to insist and see and find a way of keeping the rules. Have certainly been defending the United Nations in the Italian, not only public opinion. Recently has been, Guterres is a criminal, is a friend of UNN, United Nations, is a nest of spiders and worms, blah, blah, blah. We should just disband it. And I agree that for the little that it does, it's the only place where you can try to keep the world together and try at least to argue and show for a minimum of rules. Then depends what the rules are, but it's the minimum of rules. On the other end, I cannot, understand me the right way, I can never fail to accept that Schmidt was right, the ugly one. And it's there in the actual action of Israel, it's there in the actual action of Hamas, it's there in the actual action of the USA. So from a practical political point of view, one has to recognize that there is an extremely narrow path here to make these things useful. It's my sensation, and I get to the point, is that a lot of public opinion in Western world, which is what matters today still, is saying, look, who cares? These things are empty, they have no power, and moreover, in this particular instance, they seem to be against our interest. That applies to a subset of the people, so they're just figments, they are propaganda, they are instrument of a Western propaganda that in fact wants to pretend that we're just obey some enlightenment principles, whereas there's actually no difference. So the point here is political. So I'm moving from the academic to the person that understands politics. I have to admit, I fail to see which political message to give. If I had to do it, I would have a hard time in this moment. If I was the foreign minister of a country, unless I was the Secretary of State of the United States of America, and with the full back of the president, I would have a very hard time saying, okay, let's do this. And I suspect that the day in which Netanyahu gets on an airplane and flies to Berlin, he's not going to get arrested.
Well, look, first of all, if Netanyahu were to fly to Berlin, he probably wouldn't get arrested, but Berlin will assume, I think correctly, that he won't take the chance. So I don't think he's flying to Berlin or to Paris or to London anytime soon. And he'll actually worry even flying over them in case he has an emergency landing. on the way to Washington. So that's a kind
Gonna
of
make for a very complicated trip.
exactly. He'd have to fly through Morocco. So you know,
Russia, he can go over the pole through Russia.
exactly, and maybe go to visit North Korea. So I mean, that's the issue of the sort of disenchantment with the UN. First of all, there's always been disenchantment with the UN from the very beginning. Look, I mean, I would say the following. I'd say we have to think of the alternative. And if the alternative is one of total lawlessness, what the British called, in the 19th century, the balance of power, which ended up with the Great War, with World War I, I don't think that's a good alternative. I think that having a rules-based international system with fora in which one can speak out to the international community, however cynical it may sound, often enough, and exploitative, and where you can see clearly that more powerful countries have a bigger voice than smaller countries. If you take that out, then you're heading toward a much more apocalyptic future, where large countries, powerful countries, will not be constrained at all in their actions. And there would not be any forum even to shame them, even to speak about it, where you would not have any rules that you could apply to, even if they're not actually enforced, that you could say, this is genocide. This is a crime against humanity. If you have no forums, no legal instances that can talk about it, then it's just anybody's word. So anything could be genocide and nothing could be genocide. So I think the challenge, generally speaking, outside of speaking about Israel and Gaza, the challenge is, how do you make this rules-based system slightly more just? And you have to start with specific cases. Just as happened in Nuremberg, just as happened in the ICTY, in the International Tribunal for the Former Yugoslavia, or in the ICT in the International Tribunal for Rwanda. You have to at least show that there is an option that people, political leaders, countries that behave in particularly criminal ways will be punished. If you take that out of the equation, then you're left with chaos. And what makes me worried is that Israel getting away with what it's doing is against everybody's interests. It's obviously, first of all, horrible for Palestinians, but it's also terrible for the international community, and it's actually also detrimental to Israel itself. If you think about it more rationally than the people on the
this is something we said from the beginning. This is open season now.
Right, because small countries,
the open season. There is no limit to anything,
and small countries need that system more than large countries. The U.S. can live happily without international law. It pays attention to it, as you said, only when it serves its purposes anyway. But how do you interpret what serves your purposes? It does not serve America's purpose not to put pressure on Israel to change its policies. That is detrimental to American national interests. So you can think that your national interests are also enforcement of international law, not only of your own policies. So I don't agree with this. It's like saying about democracy that, it's corrupt and there are all these political elites. That's all true. But if you do away with that, then you're going to end up with something much worse.
Well, in closing, to let you go because you might be tired, European Union, is there, you believe, an angle, a political force, because you need a political force, a perspective in which in this, I mean, you're describing a state of affairs that requires somebody to try to be the enforcer, if not the enforcer, at least the promoter, and a convincing promoter. And we all remember Stalin's question, how many armored division does the Pope have? And so it seems to me that in the current international setting, with all its terrible division, hypocrisies, and so on, European Union is the only agent that can try at least to be the promoter and try to involve in a way or another the United States in part of this. Other I don't see, frankly. I don't see any other player on the world scenery that can do that. And I'm not that I'm particularly optimistic, but I would like to hear your thoughts on this.
Look, I mean, my opinion is that the sequence is the opposite. That is, the only enforcer in the case of Israel specifically is the U.S. And if the U.S. did it, then it.
No, I was thinking at the general picture, and including Israel.
So I'll start with the case of Israel. I mean, in the case of Israel, the only enforcer would be the United States. And if it decided to change policy course, which it could easily, Europe, large parts of Europe, major European powers would follow suit. Germany, France, Britain, Italy Spain would all follow suit.
Sure. But we know that the United States will not, Omer. They will not.
We don't know exactly. Right now, we certainly don't know exactly where it's going, because we're going to get a president who doesn't know what he wants, and he may, who knows what he will do. I think that the United States, sooner or later, under Trump or not under Trump, will realize that it's spending a lot of money and a lot of political capital, a lot of moral capital on a bad cause. I think that in the long run, the United States will understand that supporting extremist Israeli policies is not in its national interest. And when he reaches that conclusion, and that might be sooner rather than later, then it will change course. And if it changes course, then that will change a whole lot of things. I don't know when that would happen, but because my own predictions of what's going on in the Middle East are such that Israel will end up as a full-blown apartheid state, I think that the United States will gradually remove itself from that equation. On the general issue, again, look, I mean, Europe is itself, I don't have to tell you, pretty not, let's say, not in total agreement with itself. There are various European countries that have very different takes on the role of the UN, on the relationship with the United States. So I don't know that we can say for sure that would be the only source. I think it would have to be Europe, and especially countries, again, Germany would be very important in this, the UK would be important. Italy is a bit of a problem case considering its own government, maybe currently not the best partner. But it would not, none of that would happen without a major involvement of the United States.
All right. Well, not not an optimistic picture. You do have this view that we don't know what Trump wants to do, but I'm afraid that as far as the Middle East and that part in particular, there's very little doubt, because he's probably aligned with the views most of his party and a good part of the Democratic Party as well. So I place very little hope on there. Yeah, I'm tempted to ask you, what do you think it's going to be the destiny of the, at least half of the 7 million you were talking initially, but we've gone at a good hour, and I know you come from another debate, so maybe we'll wait a bit and I'll send you another message.
Okay, I'll be in Israel soon, so I'll be better
Enjoy
informed.
Italy. Enjoy Italy.
Thank you. Thanks.
Thank you,
Okay.
Omer. Thanks for
Thank
coming.
you.
Thanks
Bye-bye.
Bye. Allora, niente, saluto, guarda Recchia, fai una specie di misto di pena e di fastidio. Adesso ti blocco. Hai passato 3/4 d'ora a cercare di leggerti il Rome Statute e siccome probabilmente sei anche poco sveglio, non l'hai nemmeno capito. Quindi, per favore, vivo tranquillamente senza il tuo abbonamento e provo un senso di ribrezzo per quel $1,70 che hai pagato per l'abbonamento di questo mese, d'accordo? Le persone come te mi fanno, onestamente, schifo, d'accordo? Ciao caro. E grazie a quelli che hanno ascoltato con attenzione le parole, le analisi. Chi ha argomenti, analisi ed evidenza, ovviamente, invitato a portarle. Chi purtroppo, come il soggetto che abbiamo appena nominato, ha solo odio, confusione e una mente oggettivamente debole, è pregato di andare altrove dove ci sono i predicatori dell'odio e gli ignoranti. Avete solo l'imbarazzo della scelta nel paese chiamato Italia. Grazie, arrivederci, buonasera.